Why, hello there, my friends. Long time no see. It's been several days. It wasn't my intention to go from, 100 to 0, but I'm thinking, a few uploads a week, maybe 2 to 3 uploads a week is probably appropriate. I wouldn't be surprised if occasionally my quantity of uploading goes down to one a week, because I do have a lot that I'm uh, planning to do, and many of those things will interfere directly with the time slots that I have been using to film. And I don't have enough time to prepare meaningful, compelling topics uh, 7 times a week anyway, right now. So, um, you know, just uploading for the sake of it, I don't think that's the best use of my time or your time. So, I think it took some doing to realize that, but here we are. I've realized it. I'm going to be uploading somewhere between 1 to 3 times a week, and we'll go based on that. So anyway, as you can imagine, based on the title of this video, I went to a synagogue. I did not go to the Catholic Church, which is what I was planning to do. I spent the week thinking about my experience going to the Orthodox Church, and realized that my primary stumbling blocks will all be present in the Catholic Church, and likely will all be present in the Protestant Church as well. And so it didn't make a whole lot of sense to go to a Catholic church, transparently. And so instead, I started thinking, well, I could go to a mosque or I could go to a synagogue. And indeed, I chose to go to a synagogue. So unexpectedly, the video has changed from, Catholic Church first impressions to um, Judaism first impressions. So what were my first impressions with Judaism? Well, originally I had planned to go to a temple synagogue on um, Saturdays and then attend the Catholic Church on Sundays. But I decided not to do that. This cigar really does not want to stay lit. It's kind of a frustrating cigar. I decided not to do that, and instead opted to go to the temple only. And it's actually been a little bit of a process to be able to go. I do not blame them for that. I think it's a crazy time in the world right now, and everyone is being cautious, especially with people who are showing up for the first time and don't have a tradition. And I don't blame them at all for being a little bit cautious with newcomers. And so I showed up, and everyone, I think I was asked maybe 7 times yesterday, um, why are you here? A valid question, a difficult question to answer. And my most common response was, I think, if you've read Viktor Frankl, I'm on man's search for meaning. I'm looking for answers. I'm looking for truth. My father said that I'm a seeker by nature, and I'm in the process of that, and I have not found the answers that I'm looking for. And unlike most people, I'm not approaching this from a modern lens. I'm not using modern ethics to judge Christianity or any religion in particular. I'm approaching this almost exclusively from a philosophical lens. Um, and the the Ethical questions can come later, but the first order of business is, does this set of ideas violate the laws of reality? Is it congruous with reality? Could this be true at some level? Axiomatically, is this a coherent set of ideas? And the Trinity, and the idea that accepting it requires a faith leap. For me, it's not a simple matter of faith. It's a matter of understanding that at some philosophical, ontological level, the Trinity destroys reality itself. And it wasn't until I went to the Orthodox Church that I realized how much that was going to bother me, hearing that affirmed over and over and over again. Um, Jordan Peterson has sort of brought me to a place where I can hear people talk about Christianity, and it doesn't really bother me because I've been basically secular for 18 years, um, approximately 15 certainly. I think in the past like 2 years, I've realized that I do believe in God, even though I don't have any kind of concrete factual evidence for it. So I've drifted closer and closer to uh, the view of God and the propositional aspect that there is a God. Seems more likely to me now than it ever has before, even if I don't believe that I could prove that to you. But to me, it seems fairly obvious at this point. Then the question remained, is there a sect or a set of faiths or traditions in which I could congregate? And does there appear to be any religion which has the ring of truth to it? And that has drawn me to the temple finally. Um, Now, I've never been to a temple, a Judaic temple, and um, it was very interesting. It was a very small congregation and quite a large building, and there was a real sense of peace about the thing to me. I quite liked it. Even though I didn't understand at least half of it, I was able to mostly follow along and understand what was being discussed and what was happening. And I thought it was quite nice, a good session of worship. And I also found it to be quite intellectually stimulating, diving into the deep stories. And I've always sort of believed for at least 5 years, but probably more like 10 years, maybe even closer to 15 years, um, since I was pretty young. And even back when I was clueless, this was the case for me. Um, at some level, that I thought that the majority of the wisdom in the Bible was in the Old Testament, and that the stories had more call to action in them. Um, when I was younger and a little more naive, the Old Testament troubled me deeply. Some of the implications of some of the stories really bothered me at an ethical level. And that was actually part of the catalyst which sent me away from the church in the first place. And that's also the reason why it was not the first place that I chose to look. The temple was not the first place that I chose to look. And the older I get, the more I realize that my actual priority is less about ethics and more about philosophy and more about theological coherence and ontology these days, because implicit in the word ethics, implicit in that, is this idea that at some level you don't actually know what's right or wrong. And you cannot know. And that's why it's an ethical question. If everyone just knew what was right and what was wrong, then it would be very easy to have a coherent and peaceful, harmonious society. But we do not live in a world like that. And so the older I've become, the more I understand that every decision has pros and cons. All decisions have pros and cons. There are no decisions which are um, without consequence. Even the decisions that are right, you will pay a price for doing them. And this is something that you can learn from reading Soren Kierkegaard. One of my favorite quotes in all of philosophy is, "Do it or do not do it. You will regret it either way." And the implication there is that you will pay a price no matter what you do. Period. Um, Kierkegaard also agrees with me, or I agree with him. We I never read him when I formulated this view, but now that I've formulated it, people have informed me that I'm not the only philosopher who believes this. But the idea that faith is necessary, it's actually part of your reality. It's the primary way that you interface with reality itself. It is the filter that changes the world from a bleak, confusing, painful place into a mysterious arena of magical things and allows you to fall in love with living again. Faith is the ultimate tool that every man must learn how to use to live well. You cannot live well without faith, it is impossible. And then faith in what becomes the question. What size leap are you willing to make? Because there really are two kinds of faith. There is the faith that you act out, which is some fundamental, that's what you believe. The way that you walk and the way that you move is what you believe. And that which you propose to believe, these are your chosen values. These are your opinions on the way that the world is laid out. And those are both faith expressions, but they're not done in the same place in the same way. So, um, even if somebody told me that, um, water would burn me, uh, and I had reason to intellectually believe them for some reason, I would still die if I didn't drink it, right? Eventually, I would have to consume water to live. Therefore, at the core level, I do not believe that proposition. And reality itself will show that it's an invalid chosen view. And this is the reason that ethics is a complicated subject. Because, as it turns out, everything is like that. Everything is like that. And so when somebody says, "Oh, that's unethical," I'm like, "How do you know?" First of all. And second of all, obviously, we all make mistakes. We all err, including the people who claim to know what the best ethical answers are. So I've softened on my desire to ethically critique um, Judaism. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I've increased my desire to understand it epistemologically. And somewhere between those two things, um, I decided to take a trip down and check the temple out. And I'm glad I did, because as I was reading the Torah, I did not experience any of these philosophical um, stress points that I did at the Orthodox Church. It was very, very easy to read. And I think what I need right now is uh, epistemological fluidity, because it's one of my priorities in life. I don't need to be challenged on uh, epistemology at this very moment, on ontology, on my metaphysical um, views, not at this moment. And that's what I said in my last video. I'm not in the space to do that right now. So the Orthodox Church turned out to not be a good fit from that front. But um, I will keep an open mind as I approach Judaism. But at least at my first impression, I'm not experiencing those stumbling blocks. Not yet. It appears to be coherent uh, with reality, with the world that I've seen. So that's interesting. Then I had an interesting conversation with a young man who is a gentleman from Puerto Rico. He's a Catholic convert into Judaism. And we were talking about the reasons why, and he listed the exact same reasons that I've been going through. He couldn't accept the Trinity, and all these other things gave him problems. And so we sort of bonded on that. And then I was discussing that with some other people, and every time I mentioned that the Trinity was a stumbling block for me, everyone was kind of like, "Yeah, yep." Now, you know, we didn't get it too much into it. I'm a new guy, and I don't know that much about Judaism, and people were quite reserved with me. But we had brief conversations about it, and it seems that we are in some kind of alignment. I got to say that was a major relief. Um, so my first impression and my first impressions of the Catholic Church were also extremely positive, and they did have so many of the things that I was looking for active, and I commend the Orthodox Church for that, and I applaud them for it. And I want those who are attending the Orthodox Church to continue and to remain in those communities and have big, beautiful families and live very good lives. I'm not trying to convince anyone out of orthodoxy. Um, but for those who can't do it, continuing the exploration is an interesting thing. Mine is currently taking me to a temple, a Jewish temple. And there was a real sense of peace for me in this place. Another thing is it's quite scholarly. So the Orthodox Church is not scholarly at all. It is a heavily mystical, um, deeply faith-centric, which is a good thing. Faith-centric is a good thing. Space. And as I studied, I realized that that is not unique to this particular parish that I was attending. That is common to Orthodoxy in general, and is a theme in Orthodoxy. They think that too much rigorous intellectualism is actually a danger to the soul. Well, needless to say, that makes it a tough place for me to call home. Somebody who is intellectually examining the axioms, the logical structure, the metaphysics, the ontology. It's a bit of a lopsided interaction there, isn't it? So moving on for me was, I think, a logical conclusion. Perhaps the Catholic Church in that sense would have been better. And ironically, what I now believe is that probably in the Christian world, the best fit for me is, after all, the Protestant view. I guess that's not a big surprise since I grew up in that tradition and I'm used to being able to think for myself and all these things. But it is missing some of the things that I really do believe are crucially important. And I don't think that it's the best medium to deal with the problems of our modern times. So onward I go, I suppose, at least for the time being. So it remains to be seen for me whether or not this um, group of who actually are very kind people, this group of Jewish people, have a community which is resistant to the lures of modernity. But I could tell you from what I saw there, um, the women wore dresses, the men they appear to be masculine. There were many of the signs of what I'm talking about present. And I don't necessarily need the maximal expression of that. I think people should be free to basically do what they want. But I just wish that they would choose to express themselves in alignment with their biology and things like that. I think that that would be congruous with reality and what is ultimately best for them at some level. It would be the most harmonious way to live. Not everyone can live in the most harmonious way, but I think that efforts should be at least attempted. You should attempt to live in harmonious nature with your being. So at the end of the day, a fellow gave me a business card with a men's group, which meets once monthly. And I didn't read the card very carefully. And so I went again today. And it turned out to not be the group that I was invited to. So I sort of just crashed the party and walked in, which was very awkward. Um, Now, that being said, they invited me in and I participated in what turned out to be a Bible study. Um, and it actually turned out to be very interesting. Um, we studied Joseph and Judges. And I'm not going to get terribly into the messages. I just bring it up to say that there was a very intellectual back and forth, a very community oriented thing, and this stood out to me as very interesting because even during the service yesterday, people in the audience were speaking and participating in a way that I was not used to seeing in any Christian church I've ever attended. There's a strong sense of community participation in this temple. People come up, they participate in the ceremony, and then they're seated, and people will speak from the pews. I don't know if they're called pews. I assume maybe they are. I don't know. People will speak from the audience and participate. Um, there's a very community kind of feeling about it, which I thought was actually quite beautiful. And so it has community, it has intellectualism. At the philosophical level, I didn't see any axioms being violated, any natural laws, any the law of the law of non-contradiction was never violated. This gave me a profound sense of peace as I was there, and this actually may be the highest priority for me. I'm not saying that it needs to be for you, um, but at some level, I would encourage everybody to think about whether the laws of nature itself are being violated by any particular principle, you know. And mechanically speaking, you might be wondering, how does the Trinity violate any axioms, or like, what is the issue? What's really the issue here? And the issue is that it destroys time, which renders the space between the creation of earth and the embodiment of Christ. It renders it, um, in my view, incoherent, because the beginning is in the end. If Christ is God and the end is in the beginning, um, if God is Christ, and this just doesn't make any sense. And it also creates all kinds of questions, like why the delay between the creation of the world and Christ. Um, it renders all of these things somewhat trivial if Jesus was not simply a man with free will, and the delay in between those events was not simply uh, the time frame that it took for somebody with true free will, who is not God, to accomplish the things which are required. So I've said for some time, if Christ is only a human, if he's not the Son of God, I think I could believe in that version of Christ at the philosophical level. I think that I could get behind that. But there is no version of Christianity like that today, even though there were some in the early days, and in the church, in the church they call that a heresy now. But still, when you're coming from a secular standpoint, you don't care about arguments about heresies. It doesn't matter to an atheist, right? So that doesn't matter. Um, and in those repetitions to recite the Nicene Creed, I couldn't help but feel like I could almost feel Constantine looking over my shoulder saying, like, do it, recite the Trinity. And Constantine has been dead for a long time, so I didn't feel I did not feel compelled to do it. Um, Instead, I would rather authentically believe it if I was going to say it. Um, Needless to say, I enjoyed attending a place where I didn't have to do that, and I could instead just jump straight into the wisdoms in the Old Testament, into the learnings, into the takeaways, and then think about those things at some serious level. And I will also say that this is the first exposure I've ever had in my life to a group of people who, upon hearing my version of how the world looks to me, there was a warm reception. Because to me, Christianity appears to be a very Roman religion. It has looked that way to me for at least 5 years, probably much closer to 10. And I can't shake that feeling. And, when I said that, the people in the area were like, yeah, that's what it is. It's like, oh, there's a group of people who actually thinks that. Okay, interesting. That's cool, because that's what I think. Now, again, I think that the only people that sentiment would bother are probably uh, Christians. Um, and my intention for saying it is not to bother them. That just happens to be my view when I read the history and then read the Bible. Um, it's just what it looks like to me. I hope it doesn't offend anyone. I'm not trying to. Um, but it was nice to be in the company of people who see it the same way. And so, in short, after 36 years of living and a good almost 20 years of contemplation and thinking, I have found myself to a temple for Judaism, a place that I never thought that I would attend, and certainly not when I was 18 years old, leaving the Christian church largely because of what I read in the Old Testament. Because I've actually read the entire Bible. I read the entire Bible cover to cover, the Christian Bible. And I started to read it again because finishing it gave me a lot of questions. The Bible contains a sort of narrative structure, there's an evolution. And when I got to the end, I remember thinking, like, this is an incredible personality change from the beginning to the end. It's not just a personality change. As I'm older, I'm looking back on it and I'm realizing the voice changes, everything about it changes. And um, the voice changes significantly at the same time that the language changes, which makes sense. But it's not like a simple issue of sentence structures. It's like the way that the voice thinks changes. And that even predates the parts of the book where Christ are present. It basically starts um, at the time that the Greek shows up. And it's not the only instance of it. For example, if you go all the way back to the beginning of the Old Testament, there are ancient, Hebrew texts, and then there are sort of Babylonian Hebrew texts, and the voice changes there. So that's interesting. Um, but I don't think that the Jewish people will have any sort of inhibitions about that. I think that it's understood that this is a collection of divine wisdoms that were written by men. We'll see. I have a lot to learn. I don't know exactly what the Jewish people think. I don't have a tremendous amount of exposure to Judaism in general. So my first impression was good. It was very good. I think there's a lot of promise in this worldview for somebody like me. So I will be going back. I went twice this weekend, and I plan to continue. And I will keep you posted on how this journey goes. But I'm open minded and somewhat cautiously optimistic that this might be the place that I wind up calling home. Who knows? So at any rate, if you're enjoying this journey, feel free to subscribe, hit a like, do all of those good things. And we'll watch the journey unfold together and see where it takes us. And as always, please feel free to leave your comments and your thoughts and um, have as much discussion as you want, as long as it's respectful, which it all has been so far in the comment section. And without further ado, I bid you a warm evening. Send my well wishes, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much. Have a good day. This is Dan versus Everything. Bye bye.